The Knights of the Cross by Henryk Sienkiewicz. Leave a comment if you have an idea for the next book. Chapter 53. Then they, including Jagiełło, began to take counsel among themselves concerning further action. Mako thought of leaving Jagiełło and Sienkiewicz with Princess Alexandra at Plock, owing to the abbot's will, which was in the possession of the bishop. But Jagiełło was entirely opposed to it. She was even determined to travel by herself. There was no necessity to have a separate room for night quarters, neither to observe politeness, nor safety, and various other causes. Surely I did not leave Zgorzelicz to rusticate at Plock. The will is at the bishop's and cannot be lost, and as far as they are concerned, when it will be shown that there is need to remain on the road, it will be of greater advantage to be left in the care of Princess Anna than with Princess Alexandra, because at the former court the Knights of the Cross are not frequent visitors, and Zbyszko is more appreciated there. Upon that, Mako truly observed that reason does not belong to women, and that it is unbecoming for a girl to command as though she possessed reason. Nevertheless, he did not persist in his opposition, and relented entirely when Jagiełło had taken him aside, and, with tears in her eyes, said, "You know, God sees my heart, that every morning and evening I pray for that young lady Danuska, and for Zbyszko's welfare. God in heaven knows it best. But you and Hlava said that she had perished already, that she would never escape the hands of the Knights of the Cross alive. Therefore, if this has to be so, then I—" Here she somewhat hesitated, and tears streamed down her cheeks, and she became silent. "Then I want to be near Zbyszko." Mako was moved by the tears and words, yet he replied, "If Danusia is lost, Zbyszko will be so much grieved that he will care for none else. I don't wish that he should care for me, but I would like to be near him. You know well that I should like to be myself near him as well as you do, but he would in the first instance be unmindful of you. Let him be unmindful, but he will not be," she replied with a smile, "for he will not know that it was myself. He will recognize you. He will not know me. You did not recognize me. You will tell him too that it was not I but Jasko, and Jasko is exactly like myself. You will tell him that I have grown up, and it will never occur to him that it is anybody else but Jasko." Then the old knight remembered somebody upon his knees before him, and that kneeling one had the appearance of a boy. Then there was no harm in it, especially that Jasko really had exactly the same face, and his hair after the last cutting had again grown up, and he carried it in a net, just as other noble young knights. For this reason Mako gave way, and the conversation turned to matters concerning the journey. They were to start on the following day. Mako decided to enter into the country of the Knights of the Cross, to draw near to Brodnik to get information there. And if the Grand Master was still, in spite of Liechtenstein's opinion, at Malborg, to proceed there, and if not there, to push on along the frontiers of the country of the Knights of the Cross in the direction of Spykow, inquiring along the road about the Polish knight and his suit. The old knight even expected that he would easily get more information of Zbyszko at Spykow, or at the court of Prince Janusz of Warsaw, than elsewhere. Accordingly, they moved on the following day. Spring was fully ushered in, so that the floods of the Skrówy and Drwęcy obstructed the way, so much so that it took them 10 days to travel from Plock to Brodnic. The little town was orderly and clean, but one could see at a glance the German barbarity by the enormously constructed gallows, which was erected out of town on the road to Gorczynec, and which was occupied by the hanging corpses of the executed, one of which was the body of a woman. Upon the watchtower and upon the castle floated the flag with the red hand on a white field. The travelers did not find the Count at home, because he was at the head of the garrison, which was drafted of the neighboring noblemen, at Malborg. That information Mako got from a blind old knight of the cross, who was formerly the Count of Brodnik, but later on he attached himself to the place and castle, and he was the last of his line. When the chaplain of the place read Liechtenstein's letter to the Count, he invited Mako as his guest. He was very familiar with the Polish language, because he lived in the midst of a Polish population, and they easily carried on their conversation in that language. In the course of their conversation, Mako was informed that the Count had left for Malborg 6 weeks before, being summoned as an experienced knight to a council of war. Moreover, he knew what happened in the capital. When he was asked about the young Polish knight, he had heard of such a one, he said, who at first had roused admiration because, in spite of his youthful appearance, he already appeared as a belted knight. Then he was successful at a tourney which, according to custom, the Grand Master ordained for foreign guests before his departure for the war. Little by little, he even remembered that the manly and noble, yet violent brother of the master, Ulrich von Jungingen, had become very fond of the young knight and had taken him under his care, provided him with iron letters, after which the young knight apparently departed toward the east. Mako was overjoyed at the news, because he had not the slightest doubt that the young knight was Zbyszko. It was therefore useless to go to Malbork, for although the Grand Master, as well as other officials of the order, and knights who remained at Malbork might furnish more accurate information, they could by no means tell where Zbyszko actually was. On the other hand, Mako himself knew better where Zbyszko might be found, and it was not difficult to suppose that he was at that moment somewhere in the neighborhood of Szczytno. Or in case he had not found Danusia there, he was making research in distant eastern castles and county seats. Without losing any more time, they also moved toward the east and Szczytno. They progressed well on the road. The towns and villages were connected by highways which the Knights of the Cross, or rather the merchants of the towns, kept in good condition, and which were as good as the Polish roads, which were under the care of the thrifty and energetic King Kazimierz. The weather was excellent. The nights were serene, the days bright, and about noon a dry and warm zephyr-like wind blew, which filled the human breast with health-giving air. The cornfields assumed a green hue, the meadows were covered with abundant flowers, and the pine forests began to emit a smell of rosin. Throughout the whole journey to Lidzbark, thence to Jeldowa, and further on to Niedzbors, they did not see a single cloud. But at Niedzbors they encountered a thunderstorm at night, which was the first one of the spring, but it lasted only a short time, and in the morning it cleared up and the horizon was brightened with rosy golden hues. It was so brilliant that the land, as far as the eye could reach, appeared like one carpet brocaded with jewels. It seemed as though the whole country smiled back to the sky and rejoiced because of abundant life. In such a pleasant morning they wended their course from Niedzbors to Szczytno. It was not far from the Mazovian frontier. It was an easy matter to return to Spykow. There was a moment when Mako wanted to do it, but considering the whole matter, he desired to push onward toward the terrible nest of the Knights of the Cross, in which Zbyszko's loss was terribly guarded. He then engaged a guide and ordered him to lead them directly to Szczytno, although there was no need of a guide, because the road from Niedzbors was a straight one, marked with white milestones. The guide was a few steps in advance. Behind him were Mako and Jagiełło on horseback. Some distance behind them were the Bohemian and Siechova, and farther back were the wagons surrounded by armed men. It was an exquisite morning. The rosy glow had not yet disappeared from the horizon, although the sun had already risen and changed into opals the dewdrops upon the trees and grasses. "Are you not afraid to go to Szczytno?" asked Mako. "I am not afraid," replied Jagiełło. "God is with me, because I am an orphan. There is no faith there. The worst dog was Danveld, whom Jurand killed together with Godfried. The Bohemian told me so. The second after Danveld was Rotgier, who succumbed by Zbyszko's axe. But the old man is a ruthless tyrant and is sold to the devil. They know not kindness. However, I am of opinion that if Danuska has perished, she did so by his own hands. They also say that something happened to her. But the princess said in Plock that she extricated herself. It is with him that we shall have to contend at Szczytno. It is well that we have a letter from Liechtenstein, and as it appears they, the Dog brothers, are afraid of him more than they are of the master himself. They say that he has great authority and is particularly strict, and is very revengeful. He never forgives even the slightest offense. Without this safe conduct I would not travel so peacefully to Szczytno. What is his name? Siegfried von Löwe. God grant that we may manage him too. God grant it. Mako smiled for a moment, and then said, The princess also told me in Plock, Ye grieve and complain like lambs against wolves, but in this instance 3 of the wolves are dead because the innocent lambs strangled them. She spoke the truth. It is actually so. What about Danuska and her father? I told the princess the very same thing, but I am really glad, since it is demonstrated that it is not safe to harm us. We know already how to handle the helve of an axe and fight with it. As to Danuska and Jurand, it is true, I think, and so does the Bohemian, that they are no more in this world, but in reality nobody can tell. I am very sorry for Jurand, for he grieved very much for his daughter, and if he perished, it was a hard death. If such a thing is mentioned to me, said Jagiełło, I always think of Papa, who also is no more. Then she lifted up her eyes, and Mako nodded his head and said, He rests with God in everlasting bliss, for there is not a better man than he was in our whole kingdom. Oh, there was none like him, none, sighed Jagiełło. Further conversation was interrupted by the guide, who suddenly checked his stallion, turned and galloped toward Mako, and shouted in a strange and frightened voice, Oh, for God's sake, look there, Sir Knight, who is there on the hillside advancing toward us. Who? Where? Asked Mako. Look there, a giant or something of that kind. Mako and Jagiełło reined in their horses, looked in the direction indicated by the guide, and they indeed descried about the middle of the hill a figure which appeared to be of more than human proportions. To tell the truth, the man seems to be huge, murmured Mako. Then he frowned and suddenly spat and said, Let the evil charm be upon the dog. Why are you conjuring? Asked Jagiełło. Because I remember that it was on just such a fine morning when Zbyszko and I were on the road from Tyniec to Krakow, we saw such a giant. They said then that it was Wolgierz-Duli. Bah! It was shown afterward that it was the Lord of Tachef. Still, nothing good resulted from it. Let the evil charm be upon the dog. This one is not a knight because he is not on horseback, said Jagiełło, straining her eyes. I even see that he is not armed, but holds a staff in his left hand, and he is groping in front of him as though it were night, and can hardly move. Surely he must be blind. As sure as I live, he is blind. Blind. They urged their horses forward, and in a little while they halted in front of the beggar, who was slowly coming down the hill and feeling his way with his staff. He was indeed an immense old man, and appeared to them, even when they were near him, a giant. They were convinced that he was stone blind. Instead of eyes, he had 2 red hollows. His right hand was wanting. Instead of it, he carried a bandage of dirty rags. His hair was white and falling down upon his shoulders, and his beard reached his belt. He has neither food nor companion, not even a dog, but is feeling the way by himself, exclaimed Jagiełło. For God's sake, we cannot leave him here without assistance. I do not know whether he will understand me, but I shall try to talk to him in Polish. Then she jumped from her horse and approached the beggar, and began to look for some money in her leather pouch, which was suspended from her belt. The beggar, when he heard the noise and tramping of the horses, stretched his staff in front of him, and lifted up his head as blind men do. Praised be Jesus Christ, said the girl. Do you understand, little grandfather, in the Christian fashion? But on hearing her sweet young voice, he trembled. A strange flush appeared on his face as though from tender emotion. He covered his hollow orbits with his eyebrows, and suddenly threw down his staff and fell on his knees with outstretched arms in front of her. Get up, I will assist you. What ails you? Asked Jagiełło in astonishment. But he did not reply, but tears rolled down his cheeks, and he groaned. Ah! For the love of God, can you not say something? Ah! Then he lifted up his hand, with which he made first the sign of the cross, then passed his left hand over his mouth. Jagiełło understood it not, and she looked at Mako, who said, He seems to indicate that his tongue has been torn out. Did they tear out your tongue? Asked the girl. Repeated the beggar several times, nodding his head. Then he pointed with his fingers to his eyes. Then he moved his left hand across his maimed right, showing that it was cut off. Then both understood him. Who did it? Inquired Jagiełło. The beggar again made signs of the cross repeatedly in the air. The Knights of the Cross, shouted Mako. As a sign of affirmation, the old man let his head drop upon his chest again. There was silence for a moment. Mako and Jagiełło looked at each other with alarm, because they had now before them sufficient proof of their cruelty and the lack of means to chastise those knights who style themselves the Knights of the Cross. "Cruel justice," said Mako finally. "They punished him grievously, and God knows whether deservedly. If I only knew where he belongs, I would lead him there, for surely he must be from this neighborhood. He understands our language, for the common people here are the same as in Mazowsza." "Did you understand what we said?" asked Jagiełło. The beggar nodded his head. "Are you of this neighborhood?" "No." The beggar shook his head. "Perhaps he comes from Mazowsza?" "Yes," he nodded. "Under Prince Janusz?" "Yes." "But what were you doing among the Knights of the Cross?" The old man could give no answer, but his face assumed an air of intense suffering, so much so that Jagiełło's heart beat with greater force out of sympathy. Even Mako, who was not subject to emotion, said, "I am sure the dog brothers have wronged him. May be he is innocent." Jagiełło meanwhile put some small change in the beggar's hand. "Listen," she said, "we will not abandon you. Come with us to Mazowsza, and in every village we will ask you whether it is yours. Maybe we shall guess it. Meanwhile get up, for we are no saints." But he did not get up. Nay, he even bowed lower and embraced her feet, as much as to place himself under her protection and show his gratitude. Yet there were marks of certain astonishment, yea, even disappointment, on his face. May be that from the voice he thought he was in the presence of a young woman, but his hand happened to touch the cowskin gaiters which the knights and armor-bearers were accustomed to wear. But she said, "It shall be so. Our wagons will soon be here. Then you will rest and refresh yourself. But we are not going to take you now to Mazowsza, because we must first go to Szczytno." When the old man heard this, he jumped straight up. Terror and amazement were depicted on his face. He opened his arms as though desiring to obstruct their way, and strange wild ejaculations proceeded from his throat, full of terror and dismay. "What is the matter with you?" exclaimed Jagiełło, much frightened. But the Bohemian, who had already arrived with Sieciechova, and for some time had his eyes riveted upon the old beggar, suddenly turned to Mako, and with a countenance changed, and in a strange voice said, "For God's sake, permit me, sir, to speak to him, for you do not know who he may be." After this he begged for no further permission, but rushed toward the old man, placed his hands upon his shoulders, and asked him, "Do you come from Szczytno?" The old man appeared to be struck by the sound of his voice, quieted himself, and nodded affirmatively. "Did you not look there for your child?" A deep groan was the only reply to this question. Then the Bohemian's face paled a little. He looked sharply for a moment at the outlines of the old man's face. Then he said slowly and composedly, "Then you are Jurand of Spykow." "Jurand!" shouted Mako. But Jurand was overcome at that moment and fainted. Protracted torture, want of nourishment, fatigue of the road, swept him from his feet. The 10th day had now passed since he left, groping his way, erring and feeling his way with his stick, hungry, fatigued, and not knowing where he was going, unable to ask the way. During the daytime he turned toward the warm rays of the sun. The night he passed in the ditches along the road. When he happened to pass through a village, or hamlet, or accidentally encountered people on the road, he only could beg with his hand and voice, but seldom a compassionate hand helped him, because as a rule he was taken for a criminal whom law and justice had chastised. For 2 days he had lived on bark and leaves of trees. He was already giving up all hope of reaching Mazowsza, when suddenly compassionate voices and hearts of his own countrymen surrounded him, one of whom reminded him of the sweet voice of his own daughter, and, when at last his own name was mentioned, he was greatly agitated and unable to bear it any longer. His heart broke. His thoughts whirled through his head, and, were it not for the strong arms of the Bohemian which supported him, he would have fallen with his face in the dust of the road. Mako dismounted, then both took hold of him, and carried him to the wagons and laid him upon the soft hay. There, Jagiełło and Sieciechova nursed him. Jagiełło observed that he could not carry the cup of wine to his lips by himself, so she helped him. Immediately after this he fell into a profound sleep, from which he did not awake till the 3rd day. Meanwhile they sat down to deliberate. "To be brief," said Jagiełło, "we must go now to Spykow instead of Szczytno, so that by all means we place him in security among his own people." "Look, how can that be carried out?" replied Mako. It is true that we must send him to Spykow, but there is no necessity for all of us to accompany him. One wagon is enough to carry him there. I do not order it, I only think so, because there we might get much information from him about Zbyszko and Danusia. But how can you procure information from one who has no tongue? But the very information that he has no tongue, we got from himself. Do you not see that even without speech, we got all that information necessary? How much more shall we derive when we communicate with him by motions of the head and hands? Ask him, for instance, whether Zbyszko has returned from Malbork to Szczytno. You will then see that he will either not assent or deny it. It is true, said the Bohemian. I too do not dispute it, said Mako. I know it myself, but I am accustomed to think first and then talk. Then he ordered the train to return to the Mazovian frontier. On the way, Jagiełło visited now and then the wagon where Juran slept, fearing that death might ensue. I did not recognize him, said Mako, but it is no wonder. He was as strong as an auroch. They said of him that he was among those who could fight with Zawisa, and now he is reduced to a skeleton. We are accustomed to hear all sorts of things, said the Bohemian, but nobody would believe it if they were told that Christians had acted thus with a belted knight, whose patron is also St. Jerzy. God grant that Zbyszko may at least avenge part of his wrongs. Now, look what a difference there is between them and us. It is true that 3 out of those 4 dog brothers are dead, but they died in fight, and none of them had his tongue or his eyes plucked out in captivity. God will punish them, said Jagiełło. But Mako turned to the Bohemian and said, How did you recognize him? I did not recognize him at first, although I saw him later than you did. But it struck me, and the more I looked at him, the more so. Though when I first saw him, he had neither beard nor white hair. He was then a very powerful lord. How then could I recognize him in the old beggar? But when the young lady said that we were going to Szczytno, and he began to howl, my eyes were opened at once. Mako was absorbed in thought. Then he said, From Spykow it is necessary to take him to the prince, who will not leave the wrong perpetrated on such an important person unpunished. They will excuse themselves. They treacherously abducted his child, and they defended themselves. And as to the Lord of Spykow, they will say that he lost his tongue, eyes, and hand in the fight. You are right, said Mako. They once carried off the prince himself. He cannot fight them, because he is no match for them. Perhaps our king will assist him. The people talk and talk of a great war, but here we don't even have a little one. He is with Prince Witold. Thank God, that at least he thinks that they are worthless. Hey, Prince Witold is my prince. In craftiness he is unsurpassable. He is more crafty than all of them together. Those dog brothers had him cornered once. The sword was over his head, and he was about to perish. But like a serpent, he slipped from their hands and bit them. Be on your guard when he strikes, but be exceedingly careful when he is patting you. Is he so with everybody? He is only so with the Knights of the Cross, but he is a kind and liberal prince with everybody else. At this Mako pondered, as though making an effort to recall Prince Witold. He is an entirely different man to the prince here, he said suddenly. Zbyszko ought to have joined him, for under him and through him one might achieve the most against the Knights of the Cross. Then he added, Both of us might be found there, who can tell? For it is there where we can revenge ourselves most properly. Then he spoke of Jurand, of his misfortunes, and of the unheard of injuries inflicted upon him by the Knights of the Cross, who first, without any cause, murdered his beloved wife. Then, revenge for revenge, they carried off his child, and then mangled him in such a cruel manner that even the Tartars could not invent worse torture. Mako and the Bohemian gnashed their teeth at the thought that even when they set him free, it was with malicious intent of inflicting additional cruelty in order to frustrate the old knight's intention, who most likely promised himself that when he was free, he would take proper steps to make an inquest and get information of the whole affair, and then pay them out with interest.
Remember to subscribe.